you're a busy person. So you're an artist, a teacher, a curator, and founder of Artist Support Pledge and other art projects. So I know you're very busy. So thanks for talking to me today. So I know as well as focusing on your own career, you've given a lot of time to helping other artists over the years. Is it the Artist Support Project? I think I've read about. Did you have any? I just wondered what was the motivator for that? Did you have any experiences when you were starting out as a young, as an artist, when you were starting your career, that inspired you to want to help other artists, either positive or negative, that kind of drove that? What was the
absolutely. I mean, that was the starting point, because I had graduated from the Royal College in the early 90s and to mid 90s, I think 93, I think, and had a kind of good start to my career, really. And then, like a lot of artists, after sort of 5 to 10 years of being out in the world making work, I sort of felt like there wasn't really an awful lot of support for artists who actually had gone through that point of starting to establish themselves. There's an awful lot of stuff for artists who've just left university. There's a lot of kind of startup packs and support structures and all the rest of it for artists who are just starting out. Once you're in the art world, there's a sort of an assumption that you kind of look after yourself, or that the art world will look after you, which of course it doesn't. It's not designed to. It's designed largely to show or sell work. And really, there's no sort of support structure there to help an artist develop throughout their whole career, not just for a small part of it. And the idea that somehow you stop learning at a certain point just doesn't make any sense to an artist anyway. So I realized there had to be some sort of structure or had to be something to stabilize or to sort of develop that. And I did think for a while about maybe doing, going back and doing another MA or doing a PhD, but that just didn't seem to solve the problem, because A, I didn't want to do a PhD, and B, I'd already done an MA, and it didn't seem like a good idea really to replicate it. But then that made me think. I thought, okay, if I did go back and do another MA, the chances are I'll be taught by my friends and colleagues. I thought, why would I pay an institution to pay my friends and colleagues to teach me when I can go directly to my friends and colleagues?
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, to do that, I've got to find a way of doing it. So I developed our support projects, which basically creates little networks of 4 to 5 people. There's a developed structure that you work with, and you meet up 3 or 4 times a year for a couple of days at a time, and you get a good sort of 6 hours each in that time. A very intensive, very in-depth sort of examination of everything about who you are, what you do as an artist. So it's very holistic. It looks at every aspect of your element of what you are, from your passions to your interests to your strengths and weaknesses to the context in which you work, how you work, where you work, when you work. And it really tries to give, I kind of think of it as a sort of service and an MOT to the whole being of you as an artist. And I started to develop this idea 12 years ago, really as an experiment to see whether it would work. And it worked really well. So over those years, over the last decade or so, I've been doing a lot of research on how to do it and what sort of practices you can use to do it. So I look at everything from sports science to ancient mythologies to desert mystics and the way they think about how you develop wisdom. Anything and everything that can in any way help us to be more thoughtful and resilient and agile, emotionally, intellectually, and professionally seems to me fair game. So I developed this sort of process.
Who was that available to? How did you choose the people, or did they come to you?
Well, initially I was very selective because it was very experimental. And I did think at the beginning that people might think I'm a bit crazy, because I was looking at all sorts, from neuroscience to business studies. So I was bringing together lots of different sort of processes and strategies for understanding what you do, and trying to find a kind of basic sort of format that we could work with. So initially, I asked some very close friends who I thought were capable and in need, in terms of they were at a point in their career where they'd really benefit from it. So we did that. I did that for 2 or 3 years. It worked really well, and then that group sort of dissipated because we all went off and did different things. So then I started another group again with other friends. And at this point, because it was so experimental, I actually kept it really quiet. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. And that was part of it. You know, we kept it quiet. We just did it. And then people started finding out about it. And kind of the evidence that it was working started to come to light, because the people who were doing it were getting quite good and were doing quite well. So then I decided to go public. Maybe 6 years ago, I started talking about and doing talks on it. So I talked about universities and at contemporary art galleries and stuff like that. But I wasn't really in a place to sort of start offering it out to other people. I'm busy, I just didn't have the time. And then maybe about 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, I started to think, okay, I was constantly getting emails. Every time I did a talk on it, I would get lots of emails from people saying, I'd really love to do it. So what I used to do is I'd written it up, and I used to just send out a pack to people to tell them how to do it. So get on with it. What I realized from the feedback I got from that, was that actually part of the reason why I was able to make it work is my personality. That
it's a bit like a franchise in some ways, isn't it? But without the person who makes it work.
Yeah, and also I think because my personality was so much a part of it at that time, I had to really structure it better, that it wasn't just about my ability to push further. And one of the things that I'm very good at, one of my few skills is I keep digging at something. When I get bim on it about something, I just keep going, and nothing will stop me going on it. So I use that as one of the things I use in my work. You know, I'll get over the challenges of not being able to do certain things just by doggedness and keeping at it. So that I realized I had to sort of get around that. I couldn't rely on me, in other words. I had to have a more external, a sort of structure that worked better. So what I did is I actually opened it up to people, and I invited anyone to apply. So anyone could apply. There's no real criteria other than a kind of willingness to do it and a willingness to be open to it. It doesn't. What I found at the beginning, actually, I was a bit worried that people would find it a bit challenging in the way that it asks a lot of you, the whole of you. Actually, what I found was the reverse, was that actually people were so relieved to be put into a situation where they could be completely themselves and be honest about things not working, or where their strengths and weaknesses were, or what their hopes were or failures were, or what their passions really were, and not what the art world tells them they should be. Or sort of implicitly kind of alludes to what they should be. That actually it sort of took care of itself. In all the time I've done it, I've not had one person who hasn't sort of responded positively to it. You know, you get some people who find it more difficult than others, but I think just having that context of a kind of open dialogue is really productive. And one of the things this is one of the kind of key things really that allowed me to do Artist Support Pledge, is over the years of doing it, and through a lot of the research I was doing into kind of cultures that were very productive in terms of their sense of wholeness culturally, to the landscape, to their careers, to everything. The one thing they all had in common was a sense of community, and a sense of a generous community. And actually, there was a really interesting study done by, I don't remember his name now, but a very kind of high level athletics coach. He was the Olympic coach for the athletics team. I think it was in the 1980s. And he did this study where he studied tribal cultures who had sort of sporting culture as part of their culture, like running or whatever else. And he found that actually a lot of these tribal cultures, even though they didn't have the sophistication of the science behind their training, were just as able as the top athletes in, say, America. And he couldn't figure this out. He thought they didn't have the nutrition, they didn't have the equipment, but they could do it just as well. And he found that actually their motivation, their drive was driven by their community, the fact that everything was about their community. So he actually got his athletics team in the 1980s to be part of a community. He got them to do community work as part of their training. And that athletics team became one of the most successful athletics teams in American history. So there's an understanding that actually the idea that in the modern world, we take the individual, or we take an idea and we strip it down into its essence, actually makes it less potent. If you can make that idea part of a community, it actually makes it much more effective. So part of the thing with our support projects was this idea that all these little groups are connected and that they're there to support one another. So, you know, if one of the group is having a difficult time with their work or with their career or whatever else, they can call on the rest of the group, and they know that. They each know that actually each one is there to support and help one another. So I've developed this idea that it's a culture of trust and generosity, that it's generous in the sense that you give what you can to one another, but you're generous enough in that you will accept what others say as well as what you say yourself. So generosity goes both directions in that respect. And that's really important with this idea of trust, because if you don't have an element of trust in that, it doesn't work. You have to trust that other people have your best interest at heart, and that likewise you'll do the same to them. And actually what I found is even if you just said it to people, you just said, okay, today we're going to talk and we're going to talk about our work, but we're going to make sure that this is an environment where we can trust one another and we're generous with one another. If you just say that, the difference in dialogue is immense. Yeah. Suddenly people feel like they can really say what they want to say. If you just say, okay, we're going to talk about our work, they go down into this idea that they just start talking about what they've been taught at art school or what they think the art world wants to hear. And you don't really get to the truth of the matter. So I realized very quickly, years ago now, that this was a really productive way of doing anything. So I've developed this culture within these groups over the last 10 years or so. And off the back of that, we've done other projects. So one of the things that we do is, I sort of jokingly call it, partly because I can't come up with another name for it, the do-good factor. And one of the things that we try to do is, if as a group we feel that things are going quite well and that we're all in a strong position, we take that energy and we try to do something good for the art community. And we try to do it sometimes very discreetly, so no one sees we're doing it. And it might be very, very discreet. So it might just be that you try to connect another artist with a gallery or with a collector or with whatever else. So behind the scenes, it looks like nothing, but actually can be a big deal. Yeah. Or one of the things we did, so about 5 years ago now, is we set up a gallery in Hastings, which is the town near where I live. Huge, massive gallery, 10,000 square foot, got some money from a property developer. And we ran a gallery. We had 150 international artists through it in 18 months. Had everyone from Rose Wiley, Gerald Hemsworth. I mean, huge exhibitions. Yeah. And we did it all with no budget. We just used the goodwill of the community to do it. And all the artists donated stuff to do it. And it was sort of, in a way, you can't do things like that for very long because you eventually run into the problem of funding. But what it proved in a way is that generosity and trust and creativity, you can do a lot with those without very little else. So that was sort of the bedrock, really, of our support pledge. That's how I built it from those foundations.
There's something about the group that is an extraordinary experience. And do you think that maybe in our society at the moment, we're a bit divorced from that sense of community? And I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely. I mean, we talk about communities all the time in our society as if we know what they are, and they're all, but actually, really, communities are very simple. They're just the people you share your lives with. And it's about how do you connect them with one another. And I don't, if you look at all communities in history that have thrived as a community. And one of my real interests is deep culture. It's deep history, sorry, going back outside of kind of modern history and even industrial society, so pre 10,000 years. Mm. Because what we find in those communities is that they were extraordinarily successful, and that we often think of primitive society as somehow primitive and in a way backward, or whatever else, unprogressive and the rest of it. But actually, if you measure them in terms of equality, sustainability, and environmental sustainability and work-life balance, they far outstrip the modern world. They only work 19 hours a week. You know, how many people in our modern society can say that they thrive on 19 hours a week? Nobody, hardly anybody, other than a very, very small minority. And the whole of the community did that, because it was never, in those communities, it wasn't seen that if a part of the community was poor and underfed, that was a shame on the community. In our society, it's their fault. If they're poor and underfed, well, they haven't worked hard enough. Now, if you analyze that from the outside looking in objectively, which one would you want to live in? Which one would you actually rather be a part of? And, you know, in a way, that idea that I think communities really take a sense of responsibility. You have to kind of, it's not just about what you get out of it, it's what you can give back into it. And that's why the pledge has a pledge as part of it. You know, it's okay. It's not just about you surviving. You've got to survive and support your friends and colleagues.
It's a bit like turning the whole, I think most people's idea of the art world on its head, isn't it? And maybe, I don't know, I might be wrong about this, but I think maybe a lot of people think like the artist is quite a, I don't know, all about self and a bit of ego and competitive. You know, there's only a few slots in a gallery and I'm going to be the one to get there. Yes. And so I daren't share anything with anyone else in case they take my slot in the gallery. And this is turning it completely on its head, really, isn't it? The artist support pledge.
Absolutely. I mean, in a way, you know, I set up in the art world like that. I was super competitive. I was really ambitious. I was, you know, and then I got what I wanted, and I didn't like it.
It's as you get older, you realise that phrase "be careful what you wish for" has so much wisdom in it.
Absolutely, yeah. And it made me think for a long time, there must be another way of doing this, and there must be another way of existing as an artist. Now, I'm not saying, you know, I still work in that world. I still work in a world, you know, I still have a lovely, glamorous London gallery. That's how I make my living, sell my work. But it made me think, is that the only way we do it? And it just felt a bit odd that no other industry works that way. No other industry has one way of doing it, one way of being economic. And no other industry only has the very, very top of the level making a living.
And only a few people deciding who's the top as well. Absolutely. Because that's one of the things I've noticed, you know, just on a personal level, doing all these interviews, you know, there is just so many good artists out there, and far more than you see in galleries, and many of them are not in top galleries.
Yeah.
And it can be a bit difficult to see why not sometimes, you know, why one person might be in a top gallery and one isn't.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reality
for the public generally.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what mystifies the public. They can't, I mean, it mystifies the artists as well, I think. But I think the public find it challenging because they go into these spaces and it's sort of weird ritual that the prices aren't on the walls, you know, what everything costs.
You even have to press a buzzer to get in.
Yeah, and there's, you know, everything's strange. Now, I'm used to it, so to me, it's not strange. But I imagine if you're, you know, coming to the art world and wanting to look and buy art, that must be a very intimidating experience.
I think it is. I think it is for a lot of people. Yeah.
So in a way that, you know, I think that I tried, you know, you talk about kind of reversing it all. In a way, that's kind of what I did with the pledge. Is I sort of thought, okay, what does the art world stand for? Well, it stands for exclusivity, for power, for you know, it's glamorous, it's all these things. And I thought, okay, let's not do any of those things. Let's do the reverse of them. Let's make it a level playing field. So it doesn't matter how famous and rich and exclusive you are, no one can charge more than anybody else. So no one can charge more than £200. And if you are, say, more well known, yes, you might sell more at £200. But all that means is you're then spending more on other people's work.
Yeah, to spend it.
So
And it's a lovely grassroots thing, isn't it? It is.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
how
it's
specifically did you actually start? How did it actually start? How did you actually make it happen?
It started kind of on the 16th of March. I was literally sort of sitting around getting emails and really answering emails for projects that were just been stopped. You know, everything was closing down, and there was sort of this wave of kind of panic that went across social media that I could see it. Like almost every other message that came up was, okay, my show's closing, or, you know, my work's ending tomorrow. And these were a lot of artists who were either having exhibitions, or they were lecturers, or they were technicians in, you know, galleries or museums or theatres, whatever else. And they worked in that kind of gig economy where if that work stops, you don't get paid. There was no support structure, there's no furlough, it's just no money.
0 hours contract, isn't it, really?
And I thought, oh my God, this is desperate. You know, this is like the whole of the art world. This is not just a few people. This is the whole of the art world globally. So I mean, I honestly felt, I mean, it's hard to remember it now, but I remember feeling this absolute sense of, this is like the worst thing potentially that could have happened in the art world. And I kind of, in an act of sort of desperation, really, I just sat down and thought, okay, what can I do? And I thought, okay, how can we make money? I thought, we can't teach because all the institutions have ended. And also, at that point, I was already running kind of mentoring schemes, and I knew it's hard work running mentoring schemes, and you can't have everyone doing it. So, that would only serve a few people. So I thought, okay, well, the best thing to do is just sell your work, but it's hard selling artwork, so it's got to be sold in a way that would have an immediate economy. So I thought it's got to be low in price. So what's that limit? What's the limit where it's low enough that people will buy the work, but high enough that it can give you a living, so you can survive that whatever period we were going to have? And most artists who are lecturers, whatever else, they get paid £200 a day. So I thought, okay, £200. If this is a day's rate, £200. So if you can sell a work every day, or on the days that you would have been working equivalent to, then you've replaced your income. And then it was just about really trying to come up with an idea of how do you then support your community. So I came up with the idea of the pledge quite quickly, I think. But then it took me a while to sort of work out what the numbers were. So, at what point do you put that money back in? And I thought, well, if it's a generous culture, it's got to be fairly painful to be properly generous. It can't be too easy. So I thought, if you get to £1,000, that's 20% back in if you pay that £200 back in again. But 20% is quite a generous return. So that's how the pledge was born. And then I kind of played around with it all day until I sort of figured out what it was. And then literally sitting on the sofa in the evening, I just wrote the initial text about what it was. I posted a print of mine on my Instagram account with this text saying, this is what the art pledge is. And I pledge to buy another artist's work if they do the same and if they use the hashtag. So in the morning, I got up and I'd nearly made my pledge. I thought, wow, that was quick. I thought it would take, a week or so. Overnight, I'd nearly made £1,000. And I'd done the sleep. So I was quite pleased about that. So I went on the hashtag, and there was 2 people on it, only 2 at that point. So I thought, oh, that's okay, because actually both of them were quite good. So I thought, I don't mind buying one of their pieces. So by lunchtime, I'd made the pledge. So I bought some of their work. And then by that late afternoon, it was going bonkers. And I was getting 2 messages a second from all over the world. My phone just did not stop beeping. And then it was just, it was almost like I didn't make the decision. I just had to, I was in the studio up until lunchtime, and then I had to down tools, and then I just did not leave my computer and phone for the next few months.
So how I'm just trying to think of you sort of buried in artwork, really. How much artwork did you actually have to buy during artist support?
How much I bought? God, I haven't counted it. I got up to about 50 and then I stopped counting.
Yeah.
So quite a lot. I mean, I bought so much. And I bought all sorts. So I bought, cups, plates, bowls, all
So
sorts of
you
ceramics.
decorated your house really then?
Yeah, I basically replaced everything in my house with our support pledge.
An exhibition and a whole new step of furniture. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
Excellent.
become quite weird. Sort of just having to. I mean, in the end, because I was so busy running it, managing it, my wife was doing all the buying. So that was her job in the evening, was just to kind of go through our support pledge and buy something.
Help.
Yeah.
So you chose Instagram to do it on. Were you? What are the pros and cons of choosing Instagram? Do you think? Why is that such a good platform? Is there any?
In a way, I mean, I think it was the only social media platform I use. I don't use Facebook. I've got one, but I don't really use it. I just don't find I get on very well with it. And a lot of us use Instagram because it's very image based. So, and also it's very convenient in the use of the hashtag, because the hashtag links everybody. So, in a way, it was just a very convenient tool. It was the only tool I had at my disposal at the time. What I now know, in a way, is that I made a good decision doing that, because what I didn't really understand, I know a lot more about social media now than I did 6 months ago.
I think everyone does.
Yes.
Including
And what I didn't realize is that the algorithms of Instagram favor a kind of generous, connected community. So the very fact that I developed this community, that it was connected groups of people who connected with one another in an act of generosity and support, actually played right into the algorithm's hands. So the algorithms straight away liked me. So and liked our support pledge. So they pushed it. It went viral within 24 hours. And the numbers now, I mean, it seems crazy because now it's kind of slowed down to a more normal rate. But it was going up, sometimes 1,000 followers a day. It was just absolutely bonkers. And that sort of rate is, and in a way, the kind of the rate that it was growing almost outstripped any capacity that we had. So, I was getting tens of thousands of messages a day, more than I could cope with, and I was doing at that point sometimes 4 or 5 press interviews a day with TV, blogs, press, newspapers, all sorts, all over the world, from all over America, you name it, Japan. So it was, it was pretty intense, really, at that point. But it was, it was in a way I didn't have any choice. It was kind of thrown at me, and I could have walked away, but it just didn't feel like, yeah. I don't know. It just felt like that was what I had to do, and that in a very bizarre way at the time, I kind of had the right skill set for doing it. I mean, there was a lot that I didn't have. There was a lot of things I wasn't very good at, and there was a lot of skills and there's a lot of things I learned about myself that I wasn't very good at, and I didn't know that until I've been put in that position.
Delegating buying to your wife, yeah.
Yeah, well, some of that got delegated, and some of that I just had to deal with. I just had to, do the best I could.
Yeah. So in terms of the way art is bought and sold across the art world, and that sort of idea of hierarchy and power and organisation, do you think that Artist Support Pledge has kind of changed that paradigm a bit? Do you think it's made a dent, or do you think it could continue to change, to grow and change that?
It's very hard to say in the long term. I mean, it's certainly made a dent. I mean, the way I like to see it is that it's not going, I don't think at the moment anyway, it's going to replace it, because ultimately you can't make large scale ambitious work and sell it for £200. It costs more than that to make it. So it doesn't make any sense at all. I suppose what it has done is prove that perhaps artists don't have to be subservient to that market all the time. So they don't have to be constantly chasing the gatekeepers and constantly worrying about whether they are in the in crowd or not in the in crowd, because actually they can still survive. And that most artists really, yes, there are those egocentric narcissists out there who want to be center of attention and want to, you know, actually a lot of artists aren't like that. I know it's so we're pictured to be like that, but actually it's a rarefied few in my experience that are really like that. And that most artists just want some peace and quiet to get on with their work, and they want the time to do it.
I know, I think so, yeah.
They want the time and the space and the sufficient funds to be able to make the work. That's it. And to show it.
Yeah.
And actually, that's what 99.9% of artists want to do. And all of the rest of it is just added hassle. I mean, even I'm finding, having done our support pledge, you know, it's a lot of work being kind of, what's the right word, but sort of center of attention for a minute. You know, it's sort of, everyone wants to talk to you, and it's, so that's a lot of effort, it's a lot of work. So it's extra work that most artists don't really want. So if you can create an economy that allows artists to survive financially and just provides them with what's necessary to have that time in the studio, it's great. You know, I just didn't expect it to be so successful, if I'm honest.
So you said you're an artist first and foremost.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you've talked a lot about Artist Support Pledge recently, but maybe not so much about your work. So I was going to ask you a little bit about your work and your process. So I think I've read on your website that language and narrative and imagery are all kind of combined. So how do they all lie alongside each other? What's the starting point for a series? What are your driving forces and inspirations? And as that's a very general, big topic, but, you know, are you able to...
Really, I think it comes back to the same issues with our support pledge, really. It's about trying to find a kind of a wholeness to the way we relate to ourselves, our environment, the community, and the rest of it. And I think one of the things, I think, with sort of industrial societies, and I use that word rather than modern, because when we talk about modern society, we're only talking about a very, very, very tiny bit of history. And it's not really helpful to think of history in those tiny little ways, because it doesn't show you the big picture. So I tend to think that, okay, what does industrial society do? Industrial society going back, say, 6,000 to 10,000 years. So society that has accommodated itself into states and cities and has amassed power with, you know, governments and the rest of it. As that's developed over the last 6,000 to 10,000 years, our relationship to the natural world, to ourselves and to our community, has slowly eroded to the point now where not only are we disconnected from our immediate community, our neighbors who we live with, largely a lot of us are disconnected from ourselves. We don't really know who we are, because we spend, you know, our education system is set up to make us something we're not. It's to make us into little machines to serve the state and to serve industry. Whereas actually none of us want to feel like we're little machines. We want to feel like we're unique and we play our part in that uniqueness. But to know what that part is, one has to know oneself and has to understand our relationship to community. And I think even things like, you know, our environmental issues, I don't think it's any accident that as our industrial societies developed and become more mechanized, and we've become less connected to nature, that we've become more environmentally, it's become more environmentally problematic. And it's not because we're not aware that it's a problem, it's because we don't know how to address it. And we don't know how to address it because we don't see our connectedness to nature as intrinsic. We see it as a resource. We use nature for our own ends. We don't see that nature is part of us. We are nature too. And if we abuse nature, we are abusing ourselves. Yeah. So the whole thing's interconnected. So in a way, for me, making art has become about that sense of connectedness. How do I make something that speaks of and relates to all of those things? So in a very, I mean, that sounds very complex and extraordinarily, massively difficult.
I know, so I'm thinking of you in front of a piece of paper or canvas with all those ideas.
Yeah.
I think I probably just,
Yeah, well, I don't do that. I don't think about those ideas when I'm
good
making
luck
them.
with that. Yeah, I'm thinking,
I
yes.
mean, that's in a way the broad context in which I find myself, I think, as an artist on reflection. What I do, in a sense, is actually very simple. I draw, I spend time in the natural world, and one of my passions is endurance running. So I run long distance races from up to 100 miles. And I'm out in the countryside every day running. And over the years I've been doing that, I've realized that I've developed a sort of relationship to the ground and to environment and to phenomena and weather and the rest of it, which is very different than it had been, say, 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, and actually closer maybe to how I felt as a child. And I realized actually looking at the landscape as a subject is not about framing it as a view necessarily. It's about realizing that you are part of it and it is part of you. So how do you find that sense of connectedness? So for me, it's to do with not only I'd go out and draw it, but it's about the rhythms and the structures and the patterns. And in a way, nature is a set of codes and patterns. And it can be simple, it can be elaborate, but actually we are part of that code and that pattern. So I kind of develop these codes and these patterns in relationship to the drawings that I do in the landscape. And they're fairly abstract paintings, but they're all based on things, experiences, direct experiences in the landscape and drawings I've made. The idea is not necessarily to make a painting that looks like the landscape, so I don't do that, but it's in a way to try and find something that is both of it, but also uniquely itself. So it's like a piece of nature. So it's in a way using art as a way of trying to connect to that, to sort of give an imaginative topography, an imaginative world on a canvas that can allow you that sense of what it feels like to be in a space. Even things like your heartbeat, your temperature, and your sense of movement and rhythm. So touch, I've always been fascinated by this idea of touch in art, that we talk about the visual arts, but actually I think that, yes, it is a visual art in the sense we look at it, but to make art, so much of it is actually about how we touch something, almost more than it is about looking at it. And that when you think about making a painting, a lot of that process is about the feel of the paint, the drag of the brush, the scrape of a palette knife, the rub of a rag on a canvas. And actually, the looking at it is often more minor, and it takes a smaller part of it. So I think of the landscape in the same way. I think about, what does it feel like to move in and through? What does it feel like to move across? What do my feet do when they move on it? What do my hands do when they touch something? What does my skin do when it feels the breeze and the wind and the damp, and the humidity?
So is that in your mind when you start a series or a painting?
No, not in that way. I mean, I don't think in those sorts of conceptual ideas really. I think in shapes and rhythms and structures. I think there's a sort of combination between structure, which is often taken from the drawings I make in the landscape. So what sort of structures do I find when I find myself in a spatial setting, if you like, even just through a line, combined with kind of those sort of patterns in a way. And I'm always sort of fascinated by looking at things like the structures within nature, like leaves and cones, or anything that you find, even just the way landscape and the strata of rocks on a hillside, it's all codified in a way. So I'm always kind of thinking in those respects, trying to break down those structures with those codes. And then also just thinking about the phenomena of a landscape, rain, wind, heat, temperature, whatever. But I think of that in terms of things like the material. So paint in a way is like a phenomena. The way paint moves, its fluidity can be like the wind or the rain or water or the earth, whatever. It can be earthy or it can be fluid. So I don't I don't sit down and think of these ideas conceptually like that. What I do in a way is I just make drawings and I combine them to try and find something that feels like something that opens those sorts of interests up. And in a way, any conceptualizing I do, any thoughts and reflections like I'm having now are just that. They're reflections after the fact. So I make the work and then I reflect on it and think, okay, what have I done? And I think, okay, that relates to the way it feels for me to run across rock. Or, I mean, I don't think that directly. It's not that figurative, but you know, I suppose what I'm saying, I'm always sort of questioning is, what does this do? What sort of world does this create? Is one of the questions I always ask for myself. So
what you're painting, what you're making.
Yeah, in every way, painting, our support pledge, my own thoughts on life, whatever. What sort of world does it create? And do I want to live in
that
that
sounds
world?
quite an ethical standpoint, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, again, it is in a way. I mean, I suppose one of the things that I've always fundamentally believed is that art is a sort of a moral act. And what I mean by that is that without art, it's very difficult to live a moral life because it gives you the imaginative faculties and the sense of empathy necessary to feel what it is to be another person, another creature, another part of nature. And actually, if we fail in those faculties, if we fail to have that imagination and those sensitivities to things, you can't be a moral human being. You can only be, again, a machine. You can pretend to be moral because you can use moral codes and you can use laws. But actually, morality is much more sophisticated than that. It's not just about a law. It's not just about a set of rules. It's about a set of interactions. So, a law can be used for the good or for the bad. And that's where, your conscience is developed. So I sort of feel like, in a way, although I don't think that when I'm making a painting, I'm just making a painting like anybody else is. But I think what I've learned is over the years that actually, far from art just being the product of a narcissistic kind of ego who just wants to shout at the world and tell everybody what they think, from my experience, that makes terrible art. Everyone I know does that. What they do is just awful. And actually, I don't meet many people like that in the art world. I know that the media like to portray us like that. And a lot of people like to think of artists like that. And one of the things I often say to people, when I meet people and they say, well, it must be lovely being an artist, you can do what you like all the time, as if to sort of say, you're kind of the sport brat who do what, who doesn't have to have any social responsibility.
Great indulgent, yeah. Great act.
Indulgent, yeah. And I always say to them, what do you want? And they say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, what do you really want? Well, it'd be nice to have a bigger house and, nice car and perhaps a house in Greece, whatever else. I said, really? So if you get that tomorrow, do you think you'll stop wanting something? No. So what do you really want? And if you keep asking that question, what do you really want? You realize that you don't want any of those things. And actually what you really want is much deeper, is much more complicated, much more connected to relationships with yourself, your family, your friends, your environment, your community. And actually, when an artist goes into the studio, yes, they do ask that question, what do I want? But if you ask it deeply enough and often enough, the answers surprise you, and it's difficult. That's why most people don't bother asking it. And that's why ad agencies do very well supplying people with lies, rather than supplying them with the answers or giving them the question clearly put. What do we really want? So yes, we do ask that every day. We do what we want every day. But what we want is the product of years of intricate questioning and testing and hypothesis. It's not an indulgence.
I'm going to have to ask you, if you think about it a lot, what is it that you want?
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about it a lot over the years.
What is it you want, Anna, trying to achieve even, or maybe it isn't about achievement, maybe it's just something a bit
I think one of the things is, one of the things that was a great sort of revelation to me, which I think I discovered slowly, bit by bit. I started to realize it, and over the last few years, I've started to really see it, is that perhaps I've actually got it. That there's always a sense that you've got to go over there to get what you want.
Mm.
And then one day I sort of thought, okay, what do I want? Well, I want to spend time making work. I know I'm never going to make the perfect artwork because nobody can do that. So there's no point thinking that that has been the end point. That's just a sort of thing that might.
Yes. Yeah.
I want time in the studio to make work. I want to have my family around me, and I want to feel a sense of wholeness to the world in which I live. My friends, my community, the ground at my feet. Actually, that's the life I live. So I have to acknowledge that maybe I've got what I want. The issue then is not saying, do I stop wanting something? It's about saying, how do I make those relationships good?
Mm.
How do I make those relationships not only good for me, but good for them?
Yeah. Right. I usually end these interviews by asking a few short questions. So the idea originally was that they were one-word answers, although I think it's a very rare artist who's managed to do that. I'm not sure we've had any yet, but anyway, they're shorter answers. So yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna have to.
I'll do that.
Okay. Right. Right. Okay. So in your art, in your own art, what's more important to you? Color, line, design, texture, or ideas, or something else?
What's the most important is line. Line's the most important, but I love color.
Okay.
But I'm not good at color, but I love it.
So do you
Color's
want to
the challenge.
So line
Line's
and color.
Yeah. Line, I think line's the most important thing to me. To line, in one word.
And when you look at other people's work?
See, it's difficult for me to answer that. I sort of feel like it's the combination of line and color. That's why it's difficult to come up with one word, I think. Line is what I use. Color is my challenge, I think.
Why is the color the challenge?
Because you can never define color. Whereas line can always have you can always sort of say line is equivalent to that, or it's structurally this, or it's moving from there to there. Whereas I always think colors like the sensibility of something. It's something, maybe line is too, I don't know. I just find, maybe it's because I'm not naturally very good at color, but I love it. So I spend most of my time, that's one of the big challenges for me, is dealing with color.
Favorite medium to work in?
Pencil.
Favorite tool?
Pencil.
Okay.
So I say graphite.
That was coming again.
Pencil's the second one.
So you like pencils?
Yeah.
Big or small?
Depends when you ask me. At the moment, big. But I didn't big too often. I like small.
But next week might be small.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sketchbook and planning, or develop as it goes and intuitive?
It's both, really. I definitely do sketchbook and planning. I do a lot of drawing. Be prepared is one of my mottos. But it's different than having a plan. So when one of the kind of analogies I use here is that when I do long distance races, they're often in the mountains, and you can't predict the weather, and you often can't predict your relationship to the landscape. So you prepare, so you train, you build fitness, you build strategies for dealing with weather, whether that be storms, snow, whatever. But ultimately, on the day, you've got to respond to what happens. And I think the same thing with painting is I prepare for a painting by doing drawings and planning, strategies of approach, but actually once the paintbrush hits the surface, then I have to respond intuitively to what happens. So I don't really think of it as planning, I think of it as being prepared.
And what do you paint in?
Largely oil, but I'm using acrylic as well at the moment.
And at what age did you think that you would like to be an artist?
I can't remember not thinking that, but the first time I remember saying it was when I was 8, and a teacher asked me at school, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I was actually painting at the time. I was painting an owl. Oddly, I still got that painting. Um, and I said, "Oh, I want to be an artist, of course." I thought it was so obvious because I was painting an owl. And yeah, I just don't think I've ever considered anything else. I'm probably sure I could have done something else now. As you grow up, you find you've got other skill sets that you didn't realize you had. But it just fascinated me, one of the things I think is really interesting about being an artist is you realize, you think when you're growing up, you think it's all about talent or whatever else, and then you realize it's really got very little to do with talent. That's one little tiny bit of it.
Sticking with it. Passions seem to be the most important, I think.
And I think actually, in some ways, I think one of the most important faculties you can have as an artist is resilience. You've got to be able to get back up and carry on, not give up, because it'll knock you down over and over and over again. Just even trying to get a color on a surface is hard. It's not easy.
You need courage.
Yeah. And it'll keep knocking you back, and you just got to keep getting up and saying no, because I'm really passionate about that color.
Yeah,
I'm passionate enough to keep going. And I think it's that combination
of bloody mindedness, really.
Yeah, passion and resilience, I think, or bloody mindedness. I think that's what it is.
AKA bloody mindedness.
Yeah.
Do you think you have to know yourself to make art that's authentic to you as well?
I think that ultimately we all need to know ourselves, and actually to do anything authentically, you need to know yourself. What that means, I think, is complex, because actually ultimately I think we all know who we really are. The difficulty is that gets covered up with layers and layers and layers of other people's and the world's expectations of who they think you should be. Whether that be through advertising or education or peer pressure or family, whatever else, that all layers on top of the real you. And I think the real challenge to all of us as human beings, especially to the artists maybe, is to peel off those layers all the time and just say, okay, who is the real me? Authentically, who is the real me in relationship to all those other real me's out in the world? And if you can do that well, somehow, I think the artists who are really great artists do that really well. And they allow us to do it better. So when you're looking at it as a viewer, for a moment even, maybe, you can look at a piece of artwork and just know yourself. And that gives you enough strength to go out and be that self. I don't think it's a selfish thing. I think sometimes it's understood as being somehow again, a kind of act of indulgence, just to spend time thinking about yourself. I think you actually serve your world better. You'll serve yourself and your community and your world better if you are truly you.
Yeah.
If you're trying to be something you're not, you're actually not serving anybody.
How do you feel when you paint?
Scared.
All the time, or at the beginning?
Rather than fearful, because actually you can be scared and not fearful. And I think that's the challenge. Maybe thrilling is the right word. It's a thrill.
Well, they're closely related, aren't they?
Yeah. So I sometimes think that being, one of the analogies I often use in myself is that being in a wild place on my own, exposed on a mountaintop, is as close as I get to the feeling of standing in front of a painting. It's that sense that you are exposed completely, but you trust that you will find your way through. There are moments I feel scared. Once I'm moving and doing something, maybe it's a kind of sense of hope. Maybe hope's the right word, because hope implicitly instills that idea that you don't have the answer, do you?
Excited.
Yeah, I think maybe excited is the right word, because you're only really excited when you don't know what's coming. It's only really exciting when it's unpredictable, isn't it? Maybe that's why children get excited by Christmas and adults don't.
Okay. Best thing about being an artist?
Solitude.
Best thing about Artist Support Pledge?
It's given hope to so many people. Yeah, and I think that's the thing I'm most proud of, actually, out of all of it. The fact that it's given people hope, I think, is the greatest achievement I could ever have achieved. Better than anything else I could do.
Anyone's work you wish you'd bought during Artist Support Pledge and you missed out on?
Oh God, there's loads. Yeah, and there's still stuff I'm going to get.
So is this a very long list?
Yeah, there's a very long list. Gordon Dalton.
Okay. If you weren't an artist or anything connected with art, what would you be?
A monk. I realised I would be rubbish at it, so I'm not.
Top tip for an artist of any level?
Know your values. Both work and life values, I'd say, because it's the combination of the two that makes your work. And that if you don't know or haven't got a sense of what they are, it's very easy to get sidelined by other influences and other people who have strong sense of their own values. If you know your own values, you can stand your ground with your work a bit better. And it gives you a tremendous amount of freedom to know that this is what I really stand for, this is what really matters to me. Then you can navigate the world. But if you're always flowing one way or the other all the time, you're never really quite sure where to stand. You're always susceptible to everybody else. I've always been really fascinated by monasticism, maybe because for me it's like a really severe sort of artistic asceticism. Is this idea that everything in life is the same. It's just about how you do it.
And what parts of you do you hope will most connect with viewers in 100 years' time when they look at your work?
I hope they'll see that it's beautiful. That's it, really. I don't know. But I think that's complex. I think beauty is complex, but that's why I love it. I think what's beautiful isn't just what's pretty. It's a mystery in a way. And it's both, it could be all sorts. It could be true. It could be mysterious. I think that ultimately, that's what all artists want. I just want someone to stand in front of it and be both mystified and be beautiful. Kind of beautiful mystery, maybe.
Thank you very much. I haven't asked you what you're having for lunch, but apart from that.